And welcome to Politically Speaking, the longest-running episodic podcast about Missouri politics. The only podcast about Missouri politics featuring hosts that are natives of Illinois and Indiana. The only podcast about Missouri politics that guarantees that you will succeed. The only podcast about Missouri politics that knows the difference between O'Fallon, Illinois, and O'Fallon, Missouri. All right. The only show about Missouri politics featuring a host that does not like the downtown student housing in Columbia. The only podcast about Missouri politics that believes in hard work, that believes in values, and whose platform will surface in due time. A show about Missouri politics for all times and our time. The only podcast about Missouri politics featuring a host that spent the weekend gallivanting around Reynolds County. The only show about Missouri politics featuring a co-host with improvised taglines to make his co-host laugh. The only show about Missouri politics that's decided to change its format randomly to entertain and exhilarate its listeners.
You decided.
Well,
because he's creative.
It's the Royal Weed podcast about Missouri politics that strongly approves of motorcycle rides around Southwest Missouri farms. The only podcast about Missouri politics that will not be eclipsed by the eclipse next week. The only podcast about Missouri politics featuring a host that purposely wears a pink polo shirt to disorient his guests. I am that host. The only podcast about Missouri politics featuring a co-host who loves Diet Coke with lime.
Lime, that's right.
The only show about Missouri politics that fights for the right of every man. The only show about Missouri politics that fights for the right of every man. The only show about Missouri politics featuring a co-host who refuses to upgrade his iPhone for the foreseeable future. The only show about Missouri politics that requires our guests to do PowerPoint presentations for us. The only show about Missouri politics featuring a microphone that literally dropped while the music was playing.
Yes,
and it wasn't mine. The only show about Missouri politics featuring a co-host who's still upset about the officiating in yesterday's Chicago Bears game. The only show about Missouri politics featuring two hosts that lived to tell about covering the battle for Jeffco in 2014. The only show about Missouri politics featuring a co-host who is steeped in Illinois values. The only show about Missouri politics featuring a co-host who thought the recent 30 for 30 on Ric Flair was underwhelming. The only show about Missouri politics featuring a co-host who is outraged by the lack of Diet Coke with lime throughout stores in St. Louis. The only show about Missouri politics featuring a co-host who will never see another Transformers movie again until Michael Bay personally apologizes to him for Transformers 2. The only show about Missouri politics that approves of men wearing red sport coats. The only show about Missouri politics featuring a co-host who does not have an improvised line describing his show today because he's tired. The only show about Missouri politics that approves of using an index card to determine whether you got a first down or not. The only show about Missouri politics that believes firmly that you can still rock in America.